Living in Crescent Bay Estates had always seemed like paradise, a quiet neighborhood with manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and the occasional golf cart cruising down the street. For years, my family had been careful to maintain our property according to HOA guidelines, except for one exception, my 9-foot pet alligator, Goliath. He lived in a specially reinforced pond behind my backyard fence, designed to keep both him and the neighborhood safe. The fence was high, sturdy, and completely secure, but apparently it was an eyesore to the HOA. It started with a polite letter in my mailbox. "Dear resident, your backyard fence obstructs the communal view. Please replace it with a more visually appealing option." I laughed. Replace a fence that safely contained a 9-foot alligator? Not a chance. I ignored it. Then came the second letter, sterner this time, threatening fines and potential legal action. My attempts to reason with them fell on deaf ears. They insisted it was for the aesthetic of the community. I couldn't believe it when I woke one Saturday morning to the sound of chainsaws and hammering. Rushing outside, I saw 3 HOA contractors dismantling my tall, reinforced fence. I shouted, "Stop! There's a gator in there!" They paused, exchanging nervous glances, but kept going. My protests were ignored. By mid-afternoon, the fence was gone. I panicked, calling my insurance company, the local police, and animal control. Nobody seemed ready for a 9-foot alligator suddenly unleashed in a suburban backyard. Goliath, initially confused, wandered toward the gap where his fence used to be. I grabbed a bucket of food and tried to coax him back, but he was too large and too curious. Neighborhood children peered over their fences, oblivious to the danger until I yelled at them. It was chaos. I couldn't believe. The HOA had literally removed the only thing keeping a massive predator safely contained. By the end of the day, the HOA sent another letter, now apologetic, claiming they had not anticipated any harm and will assist in securing your property. Their so-called assistance was unhelpful. I spent the night brainstorming ways to rebuild a secure enclosure, praying Goliath would stay put. But deep down, I knew one thing. Goliath was smart, enormous, and highly motivated by curiosity. If he found a way out, there would be no containing him. I went to bed worried not about fines or lawsuits, but about what would happen if Goliath decided to explore the neighborhood. Little did I know, my worst fears were about to come true in the most spectacularly terrifying way imaginable. By dawn, Goliath was nowhere in sight. I sprinted to the backyard, calling his name only to find the pond empty. The realization hit me like a freight train. Without the fence, there was no barrier between him and the rest of Crescent Bay Estates. Panic surged as I imagined him wandering into the streets or worse, someone's pool. I grabbed my phone to call animal control, but the line was jammed. Word had spread fast. Neighbors had spotted the missing gator and were calling every emergency line imaginable. I knew Goliath, though. He was clever, predictable in some ways, but capable of shocking cunning in others. My fear escalated when I heard splashes and thuds from the nearby Johnson's backyard, their swimming pool. Sure enough, Goliath had made himself at home. The pool water churned as he flipped his massive tail, sending Johnson's inflatable flamingos and pool toys flying into the air. Mr. Johnson, drenched and screaming, ran from his home waving a pool net like a sword. His wife filmed the entire ordeal, shrieking, "It's a 9-foot alligator in our pool!" Likely already viral material for neighbors' group chats. I ran over, shouting at Goliath, trying to lure him with food, but he wasn't listening. He splashed, twisted, and thrashed like a prehistoric tank, knocking over patio furniture and soaking the poor dog that had wandered into the yard. The kids were crying. I was sweating. My mind raced. How do you convince a 9-foot gator to leave a luxurious suburban pool voluntarily? The HOA, meanwhile, had begun arriving in vans, clutching clipboards and looking horrified. One of the board members, Mrs. Kettering, shouted at me, "Why didn't you warn us? This could have been avoided!" I wanted to scream back, reminding them they had literally removed the fence, but it felt futile. Panic was spreading. Goliath, apparently enjoying his newfound freedom, began exploring the water slide. It groaned under his weight. One wrong move and he could damage it or worse himself. Neighbors snapped photos, some cheering, some frozen in terror. I realized I needed drastic measures. Animal control alone wasn't enough. Goliath had to be distracted, enticed, and guided back to a secure area before someone got seriously hurt. I improvised, grabbing a cooler of fish and setting a trail from the pool back to my yard. Slowly, inch by inch, Goliath followed, splashing violently but seemingly motivated by the scent of his favorite snacks. I prayed this gamble would work, but as he neared the open yard, I heard sirens. The HOA board had called the police, turning what was already chaotic into a full-blown suburban disaster scene. By the time Goliath returned to his pond, I was soaked, exhausted, and trembling. But I also realized that the HOA had underestimated the consequences of their so-called better view. My Gator wasn't just a pet, he was a force of nature. And Crescent Bay Estates had just witnessed a small taste of his power. The following morning, Crescent Bay Estates looked like a war zone. Johnson's pool furniture lay in twisted heaps, the water was murky, and several garden gnomes had been decapitated. Word spread quickly, social. Media exploded with videos of the Alligator's suburban adventure. Neighbors were both terrified and amused, but the HOA had entered crisis mode. Meetings were scheduled, letters were sent, and apologies were drafted. Board members huddled, trying to figure out how to contain the PR. Nightmare. Mrs. Kettering personally knocked on doors, sheepish and jittery, attempting to console traumatized families. Meanwhile, I rebuilt Goliath's fence, this time higher and reinforced with steel mesh, ensuring nothing could ever breach it again. Despite the chaos, some neighbors were oddly fascinated. One teenage neighbor, filming the aftermath on her phone, asked if Goliath could be a sort of neighborhood mascot. I laughed nervously, imagining a life where a 9-foot alligator became the symbol of Crescent Bay Estates. It was absurd, but the idea had an ironic appeal. Insurance companies were notified. Animal control conducted a thorough inspection of my property. Technically, I had been in compliance with safety laws. The HOA, however, faced scrutiny for removing the fence without proper consultation. Legal discussions began circulating. I sensed they were realizing slowly that their aesthetic obsession had nearly caused a disaster. The Johnsons surprisingly invited me for coffee. Between grimaces and laughs, they admitted that Goliath had been the most exciting event their quiet neighborhood had ever seen. Their pool may have been ruined, but the story would live on in local legend. I accepted the coffee, still cautious, while planning to install security cameras to monitor Goliath's behavior. As the HOA scrambled, I noticed subtle changes. Their Better View campaign had backfired spectacularly. Residents were more concerned about safety than aesthetics. The board meetings were less about manicured lawns and more about practical precautions. Some members even hinted at rethinking policies regarding exotic pets. Goliath, blissfully unaware of the chaos he caused, lounged in his pond, sun glistening off his scales. I realized, as I watched him, that the neighborhood would never see him, or me, the same way again. The lesson was clear. Messing with a 9-foot gator for visual appeal was not a good idea. Weeks passed, and life began returning to a semblance of normalcy, though the scars of the event remained. Johnson's pool was replaced, fences were fortified, and neighbors frequently checked in to ensure Goliath remained safely contained. The HOA had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating consequences, but I had learned something too. Living with a creature like Goliath demanded constant vigilance. Local news picked up the story. The headline, Suburban Showdown, Gator Crashes. HOA Pool Party. Interviews with neighbors varied from amused to terrified. I gave one statement, stressing safety measures, responsibility, and the importance of respecting nature, especially when it was 9 feet long. Some footage went viral, with clips of Goliath splashing dramatically in Johnson's pool circulating online. I braced for a mix of admiration and criticism. The HOA faced internal backlash. Some members resigned, citing poor decision-making, while others proposed stricter regulations on outdoor structures and pets. I remained neutral, quietly content that my gator's safety and my family's well-being were finally prioritized over superficial aesthetics. Goliath thrived in his reinforced pond. I installed motion sensor lights, cameras, and a high-tech alarm system, anything to ensure no further incidents. He occasionally gave a knowing glance toward the old fence line, as if he remembered the chaos the HOA had unleashed. It was almost comical, except for the terrifying memory of a 9-foot predator, splashing through a suburban pool. By summer, the neighborhood had adjusted. Stories of the great pool invasion became legendary, a cautionary tale for homeowners and HOA boards alike. Children still whispered about Goliath, and adults chuckled nervously when passing his pond. My family learned to appreciate both the excitement and the danger of living alongside such a unique pet. Ultimately, the ordeal reinforced one timeless lesson: never underestimate the consequences of removing a barrier that nature itself depends on. The HOA's obsession with appearances had almost caused disaster, but in the end, Goliath's calm dominance reminded everyone that some forces, especially a 9-foot alligator, demand respect. Crescent Bay Estates would never forget the summer their HOA's quest for a better view collided spectacularly with raw, uncontainable nature.